This is the last of our 4 meetings. And so again, thank you all for participating. And today's meeting is really about projects. Other meetings have focused on analyzing the demographic trends that have happened over the past 5 years, how we've done in terms of the goals that were articulated in the last CEDS plan, talking about kind of other ways of kind of framing the CEDS plan, and a whole series of other sorts of things. We had a great guest lecture by the state economist, as well as by Will, in terms of where we're at demographically, and that was really interesting. So for many of you, this is like the moment you've all been waiting for. CEDS plans are kind of interesting in the sense of they take a look at the region from the view from 30,000 feet, but they also have a very fine grain in listing and looking at actual projects. And the CEDS plan is kind of a gateway for funding from the Economic Development Agency. Yeah, I know, I think well, Will's on it. As you know, in August, the Economic Development Agency issued basically 3 notices of funding opportunities. 6 notices of funding opportunities, and those were worth over, $3 billion, which they need to spend in about a year, or commit to spending. And so when you read those, notices of funding opportunities, all of them pretty much have in there, that your project needs to kind of talk about how it is compatible or in the spirit or listed in the CEDS plan. So that's where we come in. And, our timing was perfect in terms of collecting projects right when a lot of these proposals are due. Most of the 6 grant kind of submission deadlines, only one, Build Back Better, is this month. Actually, it's this week, and I've actually written 2 recommendations for basically statewide projects for that particular grant, saying that these projects are in compliance with or in the spirit of our CEDS plan. So just because you're not listed, per se in the CEDS plan, doesn't mean you can't get a reference letter from KV-COG. When we have to, basically kind of run it through our little kind of truth test in terms of to make sure that it does meet the spirit of economic development and the measures that the Economic Development Agency is looking for. So this is one of the uses of the CEDS plan, is kind of to set up for funding for EDA. And just at the beginning, EDA is a federal agency, and they have their own mission and own agenda. And so some things, they can fund, and some things they don't fund. That doesn't mean that they're not, public priorities, but they may not be fundable by EDA. And so it's always kind of a careful balancing act about that. And I think, we can talk about that a little bit more later. But that's sort of like the CEDS planning process in a nutshell in terms of where we are. We've collected your projects. Thank you all for submitting them. And we're going to kind of walk through the application portal that you all filled out and kind of talk about some of the bigger picture kind of measures of both our CEDS plan and EDA. And then walk through some of the initial categorization that we've done with the projects and kind of where they fit. And we'll also kind of keep the project submission portal open till the end of this month. So if you want to submit another project, if you want to kind of resubmit a project with a different phrasing based on what you hear today or something like that, those are all kind of, all those things are possible. We're going to be drafting the plan, probably be between 20 to 30 pages, and then sending that out to the committee for review. And hopefully getting it done, by midwinter. So that's kind of the timeline there. All right. So any questions so far at the beginning? Okay. So again, we have an existing, CEDS plan, and and within that, there are basically 6 listed drivers of success, and these are all kind of, big picture items in terms of that planners, 5 years ago, economists and people interested in economic development kind of came together and thought were kind of crucial factors in kind of determining whether or not, the region can be economically successful or not. And, one of the things that we asked in the portal was just, for folks to respond to the kind of the CEDS plan, drivers in terms of a sentence or two. And I know that some of you on this call are grant writers, and so the name of the game. The grant writing agency asks you something, and one of the great ways to sort of respond is to sort of repeat back some of the language that they use in their grant request, repeat back their mission statement, their different themes. And so in kind of writing a successful kind of EDA grant, one of the things that you can and should do is kind of look at these 6 drivers in our own regional CEDS plan and kind of use that language and kind of put that in because I think it will help your application. And so again, these are the 6 drivers. And again, these are just very kind of quick definitions, of these basically 6 drivers. So asset-based, cluster development. Well, we're kind of like looking at major sectors of the economy, like healthcare, and seeing, where they locate and looking at trends. Is healthcare a growing field? Is it a stagnant field? Is it a declining field? If it's a growing field, where is it growing? What sort of similar businesses need to be located around healthcare? So that's what kind of asset-based cluster development kind of translates into. Entrepreneurship and innovation. Certainly in our region, I think many of us believe that the secret sauce of the future is going to be on individuals basically founding their own businesses, creating their own dreams, as opposed to maybe luring back a large manufacturing kind of industry, which will employ thousands of people. We'll still have manufacturing, but it probably won't be the manufacturing that existed here maybe 40 years ago. And a lot of this will revolve around smaller enterprises. We want to kind of nurture kind of entrepreneurship. So that's certainly in there, and certainly innovation, technology, engineering, all that sort of stuff, biomedical research, innovation as part of our economy. And we want to capture kind of firms that are innovating as opposed to maybe at a stable or declining level. Infrastructure and the environment. Basically, the quality of the infrastructure can determine what sort of economic opportunities you have here. And so you have to have good infrastructure that can help with supply chain issues, help your customers get to your product, things like that. But also balancing it with the quality of life. Central Maine, one of our great aspects is we have a really high quality of life, and that's a reason why some people choose to live here, is because the assets of the natural resource assets that are very strong here. So it's about balancing those things. So those are those 3. Access to capital. One of the gaps that many entrepreneurs experience is the lack of funding. If you're an entrepreneur and you don't have a track record of establishing businesses and try to go to a conventional bank for getting a loan, it's no surprise that you find it very difficult. So one of the CEDS plan goals is, again, trying to kind of close that gap in terms of providing access to capital, for entrepreneurs and others. And so again, KVCOG has a revolving loan program, also other partners like Coastal Enterprises, also targets, these types of entrepreneurs. And there are lots of other kind of groups that are around that. So again, trying to kind of close that gap. Leadership is oftentimes, kind of a key thing. I certainly think from KVCOG's perspective, we have 60 some odd kind of member communities, and and there is a diversity of leadership styles and abilities in those 60 communities. And I think some of the communities that are having a lot of great things happen, you can trace that directly to a very dynamic, town manager. And I always point out, Tim Curtis in Madison, who's now incidentally our board president, he always shows up. He knows how to write a good grant. He knows what grants to sort of prioritize. And a lot of great things are happening in Madison, and that's because Tim is a terrific leader who's really plugged in, and he prioritizes extremely well. So nurturing good leadership, and trying to kind of bring the demographics along. Certainly a lot of town managers are, nearing retirement, and we have a bit of a leadership deficit in terms of younger people kind of moving into municipal positions. And this is probably true across, different sectors in terms of leadership. Education and workforce, one of our strong points is we've got really great educational institutions in our service territory that are vertically integrated, from community colleges to four-year colleges, that all function in kind of looking at different segments within the education sphere, and that's a big strength. And then workforce development, certainly there are a lot of sectors where, even before the current labor crisis, there were shortages. So it's always been difficult to find, high quality nurses, for example, or plumbers for that matter, electricians, all these sorts of, key sectors are ones that we need kind of key professionals on. And so that's certainly something, that we need to be aware of. So those are the 6 existing CEDS drivers for the region. And this CEDS plan is a kind of a revision as opposed to kind of crafting, a new CEDS plan. I would say that one driver that we are going to put in there due to kind of popular request and kind of, it's certainly a huge issue, is housing. And certainly housing, is a big issue. KVCOG, we're just in the process of hiring a community planner who's moving from out of state here. And I kind of worry about whether or not she'll be able to find a place to rent. I don't think I'm the only employer that has that kind of, kind of worry. So that is likely to be a driver that we put in terms of how we answer that. So, that thematically, we will be talking about that. So in terms of being responsive, and I think it was, I think housing was an issue when this plan was drafted, 5 years ago. So I don't think it's a new one, but it's certainly one that we're going to add and talk about in this way. That being said, in full disclosure, EDA is very clear about many of their grants not being available for housing, and that's true too. So we can talk about some issues thematically, but just know that that EDA is not necessarily where you're going to go for funding for those priorities. And that's no reflection on the priority. It's just more that some agencies do some things and other agencies do others. So that's a little bit about kind of the CEDS plan as far as we articulate it. EDA has their own priorities, and this is kind of the list, again, of their major kind of investment priorities and how they're kind of ranking things. And I will say, oftentimes as a planner, you kind of have a list and you say that this is in no ranked order. In this case, I wouldn't necessarily say that. The big priority that EDA has pushed is equity. Equity, equity, equity. Would you like some equity with that? How about some more equity? It's a huge issue for this administration, and they're pushing it in any kind of funding stream that they can. And so that, and they've rhetorically in all of their webinars talked about equity as being really important. And so I would pay attention to this one if you do write EDA grants, because it's important to kind of speak, on it. There are some kind of things within equity, and you can kind of look up there. This is the definitions that we've given on the slides are quick summaries. The equity one is literally like a half a page of text, and they've got some very specific measures in there. So, for example, if you are a persistent poverty county, and unfortunately, neither Kennebec nor Somerset are actually persistent poverty counties. Really? Which, yes, really, Kim, it's true. No, I know, I was surprised, but it's also kind of it shows you, and there are a lot of counties listed in Alabama and Mississippi and Texas, just in terms of how the federal government is kind of looking at that. So there are some measures there that they've articulated, which unfortunately we don't score very well on. But I think that we can talk a little bit more about this. One of the things that KVCOG has been kind of restarting is we're restarting the Kennebec Diversity Initiative, which had been running as a kind of an independent kind of entity, last year, and kind of fizzled out a little bit. And we've gathered together, that group to kind of think about, diversity, as a workforce issue. And we'll be having our second meeting, next week. And I think, this is a lot of the goals that we have and are trying to get employers and municipalities to adopt, positive statements on diversity. And so part of my thinking is that this can be our response as far as being responsive to equity and meeting equity where we are as far as in our communities and the type of diversity that we have here, and realizing that we have to be forward thinking and action oriented and can't be passive on it. So again, I think that's something to think about. Recovery and resilience. Again, we have two resiliency planners. EDA, that is one of the buzzwords of the pandemic, is resiliency. And they're defining it in all sorts of good ways: economic resiliency, environmental resiliency, all those sorts of things. And so when you see that recovery and resilience, it's talking about the pandemic. It's talking about the economic impacts of the pandemic.
Hey,
again, EDA.
Yep. Sorry to interrupt. Brian has his hand raised. Brian, do you have a question? Brian Eng, do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I just started to type into the chat. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was interested in, you had mentioned, and maybe this will tie to, you're about to talk about recovery and resilience too. You had mentioned housing as being something that, KVCOG was focused on as a priority. And I know the state is focused on housing. The state economic development department is focused on housing. Would the EDA at all be willing to consider housing as an aspect of workforce development? I mean, the anecdote you just told about, wanting to hire someone onto your staff, but being worried that, they might not be able to find housing. To me, it seems really hard in our current environment that we face to try to look at workforce development and job creation if we can't actually house the human being for the job that we create. Like, do you know if there's any flexibility on that?
Yes and no. Again, I think you are a savvy customer. Part of it is like your grant making agency gives you kind of, here's what we can do and here's what we can't do. And it's a little bit about labeling. So you may not lead with housing. You're talking about like aspects, barriers to kind of workforce development, and you kind of like lead with that and then slide that, under this. But I know, like in the economic assistance adjustment grant, which is the most flexible one, I'm pretty sure they have, a pretty clear thing saying we will not fund residential housing. So, they've kind of put that marker out there. Would they do something around workforce that supports housing? Would they support infrastructure that supports mixed use, something like that? I think all those things are, I would be shocked if other people aren't asking EDA. So my suggestion is that, at least on the housing front, we have to kind of think about it and kind of relabel it and maybe call it something else that they can find acceptable. And maybe you don't get the whole pie, but you get part of the pie in terms of supporting ancillary things around it, if that makes any sense.
That absolutely makes sense. So you're saying, like, work you might need to do in the street, or utilities tie-ins to a building that has housing in it, or you build a mixed use building and you use the EDA funding to, really overfund the non-residential part of that project. Yeah. And then, that helps with the overall budget and creating the housing at the same time. Because I just want to point out that, and I think this is happening in the service region in Somerset and Kennebec. It's certainly happening, I think, all across the state, but also from an equity and recovery and resilience standpoint, that, Maine has become very attractive to people from out of state who want to live here and work remotely. And that's great. We want those people to come, but then they come and they take up the housing,
Right.
and then when we want to create other jobs for non-remote workers, for people who work in Maine and whose jobs are actually executed in Maine, they don't have a place to live. So,
Yeah.
but I hear what you're saying. It's like, just find another part of the construction budget that they can fund and then do it, basically.
No, for example, we have several sleeves of capital for lending, and we've got, lending funds from EDA, and it says explicitly we can't do mixed use projects, which is a planner. I'm just like, how can you not, it's like, let's shoot ourselves in the foot. And heaven forbid we try to build a school. Like, you can't, like, the things that they're explicitly in there, it's like I'm not building a pornography distribution center or something like that, So you have to sometimes question the kind of the values of the funding agency, saying, like, really, is this the most important issue that you want to prohibit? But I think, we've all been around the block, and I think how you deal with that is say that they're one funding source. You try to work it so that you get some of the funding from them, but you have to go to others for other funding. And I think that's what I'm trying to be open and transparent and honest about the funding prospects with EDA as I understand them. Now, I have been trying to get a call in with Alan Brigham, who's our Mainer, which is good. And he represents Maine and New Hampshire. I'm going to be on a call with him with the other EDAs this afternoon to talk about our own proposal, but I haven't been able to corner him yet with some of these questions, and he's going on vacation for a week. But that is part of my goal, is to sort of wrestle him to the ground and get a little bit more clarity on this. Does that make sense, Brian? Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does make sense. And just, perhaps this is interesting to you. I'm working on a mixed use project in Biddeford that's a collaboration with the city of Biddeford. And we did succeed pre-pandemic in getting a grant from the EDA to do streetscape work. They provided funding to do infrastructure work in the street, which was important to the projects that were going on around it, which included a lot of important residential as well. So I think I understand what you're talking about. And, if you're interested in learning more about that, we can talk more about how that happened. And I certainly want to see it happen in Somerset and Kennebec as well. In a similar way. I was just wondering if they were willing to innovate at all and go more directly. But I hear what you're saying. I mean, it seems like these things are expressly put into these funding opportunities, and you just kind of have to do the quote unquote layer cake approach of how you come up with the financing.
So one of the things I was going to talk about in the recovery slide is that they're very kind of, like, they say recovery and they say pandemic, but you can't really fund public health interventions, with EDA funds, around, that, which is, again, sort of like one of those things, like, you say this is about the pandemic and the recovery, like, can't we get some money towards this sort of stuff too? But that's also something that they have some language about. So again, it's kind of a nuanced balancing act there.
Do they say that because they feel like that money is already in a different bucket?
They think it's
they've already given.
They probably think it's in a different federal bucket
than
this. And again, that's fair, and again, all these different federal agencies, serve different audiences and constituencies. But so again, kind of moving on with some of the other priorities, manufacturing, again, building our manufacturing base back in the United States is a big deal. And certainly something along those lines is something that EDA wants to hear about. So, for example, one of the loans that we recently gave out from our CARES Act loan was to put a plywood plant in Bingham, and this will be the only plywood plant in all of New England. And so that's kind of a big deal because plywood is now manufactured in China and Russia, and that's pretty interesting. And so we want to kind of change that dynamic. So that's an example of kind of a manufacturing project that caught EDA's attention, and that they really like that project, and I like it too. So that's a good one. Technology-based economic development. Again, trying to build out, new technologies like artificial intelligence. They actually use artificial intelligence in their Build Back Better grant. as an example, if you wanted to become a hub for artificial intelligence and kind of luring different enterprises that are working on that new field. That's like the kind of the hip buzz thing, right now. So anything that's technology based, that's forward thinking, there's a bias towards action there from EDA. Workforce development, if you want to deal with EDA, like that is the go-to word, and how many jobs are you creating, what salaries they are, all that sort of stuff, what's the duration of the jobs. I can't emphasize that enough. Like if you are in your grant writing phase, workforce development, have some more with that. That's a really important one. Environmental sustainable development, again, trying to address the environmental impacts of development and how your development is maybe a little bit different in terms of using renewable energy or having a lower stormwater footprint, or kind of reusing a site as opposed to being a greenfield development. All those things are good to talk about. And then finally, the last one, export and direct foreign investment. If there are projects that you can lure funding from outside the United States and to come here and do that, or our export industries, those are all good ones that they're talked about. And I will say though, in this ranked choice order, I hear the least about EDA on that. So I do think the first one is their first priority. I think the last one, at least as far as our region, is they're kind of silent on. They're not as excited. I don't hear as much about it. That could be just the random luck of my conversations, but I think there's a little bit of synergy there. So those are the EDA kind of priorities. So if you do go forward in kind of pursuing a project, either with EDA or kind of looking for KV-COG to say, that your proposed project in the future, say 2 years down the line, talk about these priorities, talk about both KV-COG, CEDS priorities, and talk about these in your request. And that makes everyone's life a little bit easier. So this is a little bit of a kind of a look under the hood about, at least our request in terms of the initial kind of outline. So just for refreshing your memory, thank you all for submitting, different projects. And this is basically, we're kind of using this as just a quick way to generate some project ideas, that'll be featured in the CEDS plan. And these are kind of like, the purpose of this was kind of a thumbnail sketch of ideas. We're kind of like making a clam chowder here. We're kind of throwing in, the potatoes, throwing in the corn, throwing in the clams, et cetera, just a little bit of different things. So, my guidance to folks was like no more than say 2 sentences on each thing, just to give us a quick overview. So kind of a quick name of the project, who's kind of the principal leader behind it, trying to sort of look at how, these projects are of greater regional significance, in terms of, ideally as a planner, I would like, all the projects in the CEDS plan to be kind of bigger than just one community, in terms of like having greater significance than just say doing a sidewalk in a downtown. And while that's really important, it's a little bit too narrow. And if we can do something that's a sidewalk that connects 2 towns, like that's really great, because hey, I'm a regional planner. I got to think above, bigger than a bread box. So that's what's behind there. Current or potential partners, is this a solo project of a particular entity, or are others involved in it? What sort of funding do you need? Any kind of match funding? We actually ran this kind of question list by Alan and kind of talking about kind of what made for a good CEDS project. And this was his question that he put in: is there political and public will to see this project move forward? So what Alan is looking for is, do you have all your ducks in a row? Do your selectmen support this project? Do they hate it? Is it, controversial? Does anyone know about it outside of your particular organization or entity? And so the more that you're able to say like, oh, we've got letters of support from, the 2 towns that are affected. Great. That's stuff that we're kind of looking for here. And it's stuff that EDA is looking for, because they want to know that your projects don't have to be shovel ready, but they should agree that the shovel exists and that they want to use the shovel. So that's, I think, like, kind of what that refers to. And then the other two questions, again, how does this project kind of loosely address the CEDS drivers? So I've given you a little bit more information about kind of the CEDS drivers and then EDA funding priorities. And again, in looking at that, I was just looking for a couple sentences, that says, something like X project addresses equity in X kind of ways, or, we're really strong on resilience and sustainable development, so that we have kind of a little bit of a sketch. And so that many of you are going to be writing, grants, also kind of it helps you kind of almost do an outline of the themes that you need to strike. And then how are you kind of, again, a typical plannerly question, which is measuring success. How do you know that this project is going to make a difference to our communities? And so that's a little bit of a kind of a thumbnail of kind of the of the project list. And we're going to keep the project portal open till the end of the month. So again, if you have other projects that you want to put in, it's still open. So now I'm going to go through, and we got, a nice series of probably, 20 or 25 projects. And what I did was I kind of categorized them by different types. And I'm going to just feature one project in each of the different types. And I'll also try to talk about the other projects that are there, just so in case, you say, well, I submitted one and you don't have it, technology is not perfect. Or maybe something got deleted, but I'll try to make sure that we have all the projects that you in fact submitted. So the first kind of category I'm going to call transformative infrastructure projects. And one of the ones that we're working with some towns is we have like a lot of towns that have large municipal waste treatment facilities that were serving a mill, and then the mill closed down. And one of the ways that we can use that extra capacity is by retrofitting them to deal with the PFAS issues. And PFAS is a huge contaminant issue that's really touched down in central Maine, particularly in Fairfield. But for about $3 million, you can get a retrofit with what's known as a PFAS reactor, remove those PFAS, and we could actually not only be treating our own kind of waste streams, but other communities are going to be facing the same issue. So the town of Madison and also the town of Heartland have municipal waste treatment systems because of their older mills that can be primed for doing this. So we got submissions both from Madison and from Heartland, on that. And KVCOG is going to be working on a kind of a joint proposal for EDA funding around that, as well as trying to kind of lure in maybe a testing facility to do PFAS testing. So again, this was from Dale Clark. Again, we're talking about leadership. He's a really dynamic leader in Madison, and is always thinking about kind of how to use market forces in his waste treatment process. So other infrastructure projects, Madison Biodigester, the old Madison Mill has a couple large tanks that they can't use. And they're proposing to kind of create anaerobic digestion on site to turn the waste into energy. So that's kind of an infrastructure-y kind of proposal. Town of Bingham proposed Upper Kennebec Valley broadband. They need broadband, so that's something that they put in. And broadband was a theme in our last CEDS plan, and it's a theme now. So broadband is send us your broadband projects, etc. So that would be good. Kim Linloft here submitted the extension of the industrial road to Fairfield. So that's an example, I would say, of a kind of an infrastructure-y project. And Kim was very good. It involved two towns, Fairfield and Waterville working together. That's what we like. We like that. So good stuff there. So those were the kind of infrastructure type of projects. The next category is business parks and industrial parks and planning for expansion. So we're fortunate to have Jim Dingle on the call. Hello, Jim. So this is the project he submitted to again expand some of the infrastructure out past T-Mobile and things of that nature. So we do have a series of business and industrial parks, and KVCOG is going to be working, with the collection of these groups to again try to submit an EDA proposal for all of our industrial parks, or at least more than one in our region, so that we're kind of creating a kind of a regional approach to our industrial and business parks, and trying to kind of go about it that way. So, this is Jim's, proposal. We also got one from Libby Hill Business Park, and then one from Garvin from Trafton Road Manufacturing, which I'm classifying as a business park. It's a hub, so that counts. So that is in there. And so we got 3 kind of proposals in that basket, so to speak. Moving along, regionally significant recreational economic development projects. So one of the 6 grants is about outdoor recreation, which is terrific. And part of that is a grant to the state on kind of tourism and marketing and things like that, but part of it will actually fund recreational projects. Now, I know that we've got some great kind of minds on here, and I want to emphasize, underscore in bold this letter, this emphasis: regional, 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 regional. They actually, in their grant thing, say that they don't want local amenities like local golf courses and local parks. So they don't want our proposal from, the town of Skowhegan to put in park benches or something like that. They want kind of something, a regionally significant economic development project that's going to be drawing people from the region, in other words, outside of your town, even outside of your state, to your area. So the Run of the River Whitewater Recreation Area, many of you know about this, Christine Cannon, great dynamic project. If successful, this will be the first standing wave, in the state, and one of the only ones in our entire region. So you can make the case that people from Rhode Island would maybe drive up here and go kayaking, in November at this standing wave. Like, you can make a case for that. It's not just the people in Skowhegan coming out and doing that. So it's of regional significance. So emphasize that, because if you only talk about it as a city park or a smaller scale project, they're just going to say it's not applicable. That's my guess, just based on how that they have labeled this. So also in here is, Quarry Road. Now, Quarry Road significant, and full disclosure, I'm on the board of Quarry Road, and yes, I have a bias. But Quarry Road is regionally significant because it's the only Nordic ski center in the state with snowmaking. So if you want to go cross-country skiing in November, there isn't any other place that you can go in Maine outside of coming to here. In fact, we get people, from, Southern New England. We get college teams like Harvard coming up in November to use our facility. So it is regionally significant, and our sales passes are beyond just Waterville. We have people coming up with season passes from Belfast, from Damariscotta, who make that investment. So emphasizing that regional component. Riverfront park expansion, Tracy submitted that from the town of Gardner. Again, I view, Kennebec is in our name. So, I would emphasize kind of like the regional significance of the Kennebec River, and providing access to the river is kind of regional significance. So again, trying to play that up, because the Kennebec is a great regional water source. And again, public access to that water body is maybe not as common as we would all like. So emphasizing the scarcity regionally of access to water, and emphasizing, that this is a draw for the city. Kind of linking it into the wonderful bike trail that you've got, which I often use, which I think is great, from Augusta down to Gardner. I think those are kind of ways of making that kind of a really good regional project. Entrepreneurship. Again, it's in our CEDS plan. We like entrepreneurship, and EDA likes entrepreneurship, and we've got lots of different grant proposals. So Brian, your 24 court project is in here, working with Maine Grains. entrepreneur ecosystem development with Christina Cannon. I've categorized that one as in here. Durgo Labs from Garvin, is in here as, described, what a great kind of thing. And then I know Nancy Williams has submitted Technology Skills School for Kennebec Valley around craftspeople finding, yes, we all need more plumbers and electricians. So that's kind of in the entrepreneur kind of like you're building, this type of professional. We could create a different category called workforce development and put that over there. But I was trying to kind of, this one seemed to be a good fit that way.
How is what she's proposing, how's that different from a community college system or the main technical center at the high school?
Right. I mean, I think, right now, these are all just brainstorming ideas. And again, I'm just kind of repeating the categorization. I think basically emphasizing that there's kind of a shortage, there, and we can probably use more help, more educational resources kind of around that. So, but Nancy, you're actually on the call. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on kind of your idea? And Kim had a question about it. How it is different or similar to kind of what the vocational schools are up to. Nancy? Okay, well, we'll explore that issue maybe a little bit later.
I'm sorry, I'm here.
Okay, can you elaborate a little bit on your idea and how it relates to existing kind of vocational schools?
Well, I think is always the question. And, I put this in because we had to put something in that we thought was an idea and I didn't have a chance to fully research it. But, pretty clearly there are other resources, but a lot of those are not as focused as the program that I observed in Vermont, which was not only for young people, but people of all ages. And it wasn't always to train people to be technicians or skilled craftspeople. It was also to train people who want to do their own work. And considering the cost of working on your own properties, it's well worth having a place where people can go and learn those skills. So I don't know how it could be developed, but it's certainly a need for it in our community land trust. We have a terrible time finding skilled workers. And I see all around the community that there are people who are poor, but if they could have a place where they could easily learn skills to help themselves, it would be beneficial. Plus, I think that there's always the chance of more entrepreneurship when there are people and places that can get together to work together to form new companies or even their own small company or their home-based business. I think we just need more of that in this part of Maine.
Very good. And I think that's a good observation. One of the calls that I'm going to be on later is we have an ad hoc committee around the shortage of code enforcement officers.
Yes.
And when one of the ideas is to, again, it's a very similar bifurcation that you're talking about, is providing training where people who get certified as high school people, and so in the certification process, because it's so onerous, and they could get certification that way. But then also, if you're a 50-year-old contractor and your back is gone, and you don't want to be driving all over the state every weekend, it's a pretty good position for you. So again, kind of working. So I think the trades and kind of thinking about the trades and how we encourage people to enter that, and kind of at different age sectors, there can be different entry points, is something that we can put a little bit more emphasis in. So thanks, Nancy, for that. Does it help answer your question, Kim?
Yes.
Very good.
Can I ask you a question about that too for Kim, actually, because you may know more about this, and this is Brian. I'm not as familiar with, the tech center and community college sort of vocational training that exists right now. But if you had like a vertical focus, like we were talking about outdoor recreation, for example, like let's say you had a program that was really focused on, mechanic skills as it related to running the, machines at Quarry Road that you were talking about, Ola, but it helped all of us. Like maybe it helped run a river, there would be mechanics that would be required for run of river. Would that kind of vertical focus be distinctive from what's already happening at the tech center and community college level, or is that duplicative?
I can only speak, well, I guess I can speak for the other tech center. So I was on the community college board, and I know at least here in the greater Waterville area, there is an attempt with that kind of alignment, both alignment with jobs that exist in our area that we need those skills, as well as with the community college system. And when at all possible, with the local community college, which in our area is Kennebec Valley Community College in Fairfield. So the Mid-Maine Technical Center is the high school, vocational location for Messalonsky High School in Oakland, Lawrence High School in Fairfield, obviously Waterville, Winslow, and the homeschoolers in our region. So it does, for example, have an outdoor rec program. And there are like 50 certifications that you can get there in high school. So you can literally graduate from high school and already be a CNA, or everybody who goes through the culinary program has to pass the serve state. And I know the state has a shortage of people who go into restaurants and food service industries to look at that. So, that you can go into the culinary, or you can go into more of a government role in food security. There's firefighters and police, which is something that we need statewide. So the automotive program feeds more into Central Maine Community College than it does into Kennebec Valley Community College, but that's not that far, it's still, an hour from here. So I think in our region anyway, we have made a concerted effort to balance and try to make that connectivity, and sometimes sharing staff between the community college system and the technical high school, to try to align those interests and where we need skills developed.
All right, well, I don't want to hijack more time, but just so you know, then Nancy, we should talk, because I'm involved with a building trade school initiative, the idea of starting a building trade school, which sounds very similar to yours. I've been speaking with outdoor recreation folks who have a need for these skilled mechanics. And I actually was talking with the York County administrator, and he's building a school to develop first responder skills, or wants to do that as well. So it sounds like all these things are going, and I guess really it's not that they're different, but there should be more coordinated. And I guess a follow-on question would be, is there through the EDA, can we sort of put together a project to just do better marketing and better coordination among all these people who seem to be trying to do the same things? And it's amazing. And it seems like we should maybe put some funding into coordinating so that we can feed people into these programs and then feed them back to the actual businesses that are.
No, I agree with you, Brian. And I would say, and I'll get on my soapbox, my one observation that I was kind of startled by it since starting in January is there is a real lack of coordination among all the regional planning councils and among all the EDDs and the state. It's not like we don't get together for a monthly call, which I find to be astonishing, that we don't do that. There are little subgroups that get together periodically, and I'm not saying there's no communication, and heaven forbid, and I'm not someone that loves to have meetings all day, but there is a use for it. And I think there is a bit of a lack of coordination on some of this stuff. And so then you get lots of different individual projects and a bit of department of redundancy department with very well-intentioned people, but and that's what we're trying to do a little bit different with our CEDS plan, as an open invitation for some of these projects. And one of the byproducts, even though it won't be kind of like a headline in the plan, is just the sort of conversations you're having right here, Brian. It's that's meaningful. That's why you do plans, is so that people share information and they start kind of cross-pollinating, et cetera. And so we can take advantage of that. So again, great observations, and again, great purpose. And I'm hoping maybe in the coming year, because we're a little bit out of the kind of PPP kind of crisis of the month, kind of like, oh, let's create a new program and let's roll it out in 30 days, and then let's do another one, and then do another one, that maybe we can come up for air and have a little bit more coordination. So that's a hope and a dream. So I have just a couple more slides. There were some projects which I'm going to be terming kind of social interest projects, which again, were interesting projects and they have a lot of value, but I'm not sure that EDA would necessarily fund them. And so that's not necessarily saying that they're bad projects or that they won't be listed in, the CEDS plan under kind of a category, but I'm just trying to be open and transparent in terms of like the access to funding. And so, yes, it is. Nancy has put together, this proposal, which is an innovative idea of having us try to qualify for some HUD funding, which I think is fantastic, and we need more funding for housing. But again, EDA doesn't fund housing, and they're pretty explicit about that. Now, will they fund kind of a process to sort of do that? That's unclear, but they tend to be a little bit less kind of keen on that issue. Does that, as we talked about earlier, with Brian, housing is certainly a key issue to economic development, and we're going to be adding that as a driver. But, so again, some of the proposals that we got were kind of a little bit in that vein that they're not going to be of direct interest to EDA. We'll still list them in the plan as kind of a social interest, because I think they are part of the larger mosaic of how we create success. But I think it's so again, Nancy's proposal with the consortium is in here. Impact 2032, from Courtney from United Way, kind of a great innovative plan, it is in here. And then a generic kind of workforce housing by Tracy is kind of in here also, more because, again, they don't fund housing per se. And again, I don't have enough guidance from EDA as far as how if you add workforce to it, are they more likely to, or what aspect of the funding stream would they add? So I'm just kind of putting that there in kind of that categories. So questions on that? Okay. Finally, there were a couple projects that we got. Kim, there you are. Which were kind of parcel size, and they're very specific, but maybe a little bit too specific. And I love Kim's observation here. So those of you who live locally know the seafood sign from the weather vane is still up, even though the weather vane is long gone. And it does, the first impressions of a gateway are really important to what people think. And so when people come and they see this derelict sign, they think no one cares. They think, wow, what a crazy place. It raises all sorts of doubts and questions right off the bat. And we know first impressions of a community are really important. This does not make a good first impression. Now, I love neon signs because I grew up in New England where we don't have many. So I always loved the Hilltop Steakhouse giant cactus on Route 1 just because it was so wild and different and distinct. Or the Citgo sign, by the Red Sox Stadium, which the gas station is no longer there. So you can do something interesting with this sign that can actually be an attractor. But one of the things which I would kind of urge is, and we have to talk to Kim about this privately before our meeting, so her feelings are not hurt, is like what was really behind kind of the, one is kind of the stigma value of just this one particular thing. It's an eyesore. But, maybe the proposal is better gateway signage for our communities. That's like the bigger picture, like what community couldn't use improvements on gateways, and certainly some of our communities could need that. Or maybe it's something more linear, like, that the KMD drive between Oakland and Waterville is not what Frederick Law Olmsted would classify as scenic, despite being in Maine. And so maybe there's some interventions that we can make that more pedestrian friendly and, do some plantings and landscaping to make it look nice. So that when people come here, they say it pops and they say, wow, I'm in Maine. Look, there are high bush blueberries there, as opposed to like abandoned, things. So I think Kim has the big vision there. So I think that's where, like, if Kim resubmitted something like that had that regional kind of pop, I think you'd be more successful than the sign thing. Although I think it's really cute in terms of that.
I'm tired of the Colby parents calling me.
Right. No, it's true. So those are some ones that are in there. Other ones, that were in there was also the Waterville Commons Elm Plaza connection. And again, it's not that that's a bad project, but it's kind of like within a particular shopping mall. But maybe it's something about that we need greater conductivity in some of these shopping centers, or something along those lines. One which was interesting, but it was very specific, was the rehab of Island Avenue. And this is Bigelow Brewing's attempt to kind of revise that building. And again, the way it was written was like, we're revising this, great building, which I agree with. But one of the things that EDA has kind of also pointed out is they can't give money to private sector companies. So they're very clear about that. They're not they can't give money directly to Bigelow Brewing. They can give money to the city of Skowhegan for doing improvements associated with Bigelow Brewing, but they can't do Bigelow Brewing per se. So thinking about kind of again recasting that project, so we all understand that they're redeveloping an old mill building, which is like, gotta love that. That's great, and that's hard work, and we need to provide a lot of capital to that. But they're not going to fund a private sector entity in terms of that. So recasting that in a way that has a public face is good. So those were the projects. So did anyone submit a project that I haven't listed?
Hey, can I ask a question? This is Christina.
Sure.
Just for clarification's sake for people on the call, I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about the difference that you saw between the 24 Court Main Grains project and the Bigelow Brewing project, just because I think that there may be some question as to why one would be eligible possibly and one would not be. And I guess I just wanted to, for my own sake also, just curiosity.
Yeah, again, that would be more my kind of level of literacy, where Bigelow Brewing is kind of clearly a individual private entity kind of applying. And my read of kind of the 24 Court is kind of like more a business incubator kind of like thing in terms of how it's packaged. So I don't know anything more than how Brian has packaged it about whether or not it would be Main Grains applying for it, or if it's a nonprofit development corporation that's kind of putting it in or something like that. So I put it more in the entrepreneurship category because of that. So Brian, how am I doing?
That's great. And Christina, I mean, I think it ties to the service network, Christina, and the innovation center piece that you and I have been talking about, housing within 24 Court. Where ULA placed the project, in that entrepreneurship category, I think it really is. I mean, and like I think ULA said this earlier, it's about how you describe your project, not necessarily what the project is. And it's just the fact that we're trying to put this advisory network together to attract a number of new businesses into the space, and then support them with bookkeeping and marketing and HR and all those other types of annoying administrative tasks that small businesses face that distract them from their core value proposition. So I think that's a piece of it. So I did have a follow-up question on that, Ula. Talking about Bigelow and talking about Christina's entrepreneurial ecosystem work, Run of River, and 24 Court. Like, what if it was all in the context and the fact that Skowhegan is this, it is the county seat of Somerset County, and so much traffic flows through the downtown. Like it's a major crossroads of all of these important high traffic roads that are important for maintaining the economy of the region and the state as a whole. Like, if we were looking at the Bigelow project and improvements on Island Avenue and and that area, like in a way where, because I'm burying the lead because Christina has started this downtown design initiative in Skowhegan as well to try to make downtown function better. Like, would that be something that we should maybe be putting a submission in for, that would touch on all of the projects, just making like the roads operate better and the
Right.
user experience operate better?
So I'm going to give you a hunch and a hypothesis as opposed to a statement of fact. So the Build Back Better grants, I love the Build Back Better approach. I thought it was finally an incredible, dynamic, innovative approach to economic development, where they were saying, send us 3 to 8 projects that we'll fund simultaneously, And so they gave an example of kind of trying to seed an artificial intelligence hub. And I thought, like, wow, like this is exactly, as a planner and someone who works in economic development, like this is like a once in a lifetime, you mean thinking regionally and holistically and putting it all together. So, but the word on the street is, because the timeline is so tight, which is tomorrow, I think is the submission for the phase 1, where you get $500,000. And they're only selecting, I think, between 50 or 60 projects nationally, and it'll go down to like 40. So it's going to be really cutthroat. But they're going to get a lot of submissions, and they're going to get a lot of declines on those first ones. And then those projects are going to bounce over to economic adjustment, which is more liberal, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we're thinking about grant strategy, we want to do collaborative projects, because we're going to be going up against other kind of projects that got bounced out of Build Back Better. And so as a planner, I love these kind of like, let's kind of turnkey it and like, and dream big. So, that's why at COG, we're trying to do something with all of our business and industrial parks and kind of create something that's kind of funding all the infrastructure and projects that are needed there. That's why we're trying to support this regional approach to PFAS. Is kind of like, I think they want us to sort of, dream above the bread box. So if you kind of think of something in Skowhegan where there are a couple different projects that you can put together in a public wrapper, and then kind of manage that out. My hunch is that you'll be better off than if you just submit an individual project for one particular thing. And that's just a hunch. Does that answer your question?
That actually does. And so, Christina, that gives us some real food for thought, I think, to talk about coordination.
Yeah. So Tim.
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to speak to this from my experience and out of an abundance of frustration with EDA programs and private businesses. We've been down this road a dozen times with GoLabs, and we have not used $1 from the EDA in Madison with GoLabs, simply because it all would be perceived as a pass-through from the federal government to the town to a private business.
Yeah.
So trying to help a private business improve their structure, demolition, new construction, purchasing of equipment, no-go from EDA. There are other avenues to do this. So don't put all your eggs in the EDA basket when you're looking to fund those projects that are going to benefit businesses. The EDA is frustrating to the fact that they say that they are all about helping small business grow, but they cannot give money to them, and you can't even take their money and then sub-grant it to a business. So I think, even going back to the idea of removing eyesores that might be up and down the interstate, if they're all on private land, then this money won't apply to that, because it has to be that landowner that's going to do that work. So does anybody remember the silent woman?
Yeah.
Kim, I figured. And that don't read anything into that comment, Kim.
We're all friends here. We're all friends here. Yes.
Tim knows I'll get him back.
That's right. That's right. It's a competitive region. Good forechecking.
Yeah. Bill Card also had some comments. Bill, if you wanted to chime in.
Sure. Thanks, Will. And Ule, I think you've done just a great job of articulating the nature of EDA and the projects. in my past life, I spent about a decade in a congressional office, and what you have spoken to is largely the experience that we had. There's a couple other ideas that I had, though, both for context and for specific projects. One is when we used to do EDA projects, we would always lead with telling, right in the application, talking about how bad things are. And that was, and there's a reason for that. You're trying to assist economically disadvantaged communities. And if you start off by talking about how great things are, then it goes to, oh, well, they don't need our help. So there was a standard cookie cutter approach that we used, which was we started off by talking how bad things were. This is how terrible things are. And what I was thinking about, like with Gardner, for example, there was a box factory there, a corrugated box factory that closed a decade ago. So there was a significant job loss there. So you talk about things like that, and if the median household income in your community is particularly low, you talk about the poverty rates and things like that. So economic distress is a theme that goes way back with EDA. And then after you talk about how bad things are, you talk about how great things could be if we did this project. And so that's just a observation from my experience, and it is something that has led to successful funding of projects. The other thing I was thinking of is when you're thinking about regional projects, you want to add something that we might not ordinarily consider. And I'm going back to Brunswick Station. Brunswick Station was funded by EDA over a decade ago. And one of the biggest selling features for that economically distressed community was that it would be a transportation hub. And that's something that folks in these different communities may or may not think of, but that's an added piece that adds value in the thought process of the folks that are doing the evaluating. So it's your project. It's also, you want to add the regional in scope, but you want to add other things that like that might be of use. I've heard the concern about funding for private businesses. That has always been the case with EDA. And again, I don't work for EDA. I work for the Small Business Administration. So I'm speaking only to my past experience working in collaboration with EDA. And I'll talk about the SBA piece in a minute. But those are some pieces that are really important, and I think you covered it really well. And the reason why is that EDA historically has been reluctant to fund projects that provide a direct benefit or disproportionately benefit an individual or small group of people. And so that's been in place for a long time. And so the way that you work around that is the regional in scope thing. And another way that we always used to work on projects was to get the EDA folks up here. And I mean beyond Alan, he's very talented. But Linda Cruz Carnell is the regional director in Philadelphia. There are 10 regional directors in the country, and they're all responsible for X amount of dollars and X amount of geography. And one of the things that we were always concerned with in a congressional office is to make sure that Maine got its fair share. And so one of the ways to maximize the prospects of that, in my view, would be to engage the congressional folks to whatever extent you would like, and also get the EDA folks up here. When we had the assistant secretary visit Millinocket, in January one year, which was it was quite interesting. And
how did you convince them to come in January? That's that. Was there beer involved? Lots of beer?
No, it was mostly letterhead and a signature, and then they came. So I wouldn't underestimate the value of the congressional offices. Yep. And the influence that they have in at least getting attention for projects or regions. Right. And you know, once you get there, you got to get in their sphere of awareness. And Dennis Albert is the Deputy Assistant Secretary now for Economic Development. He was in DC 15 years ago, and he's a great guy. So all of these folks aren't all, you know, political folks. Some of them are really project driven, but you got to get their attention. And Ule, I think, you know, something from you in conjunction with one of the other congressional offices or all of them might get them up here. And once you get into their sphere of awareness, then the next step is, how about funding some of these projects?
Right. And one point you have like earmarks are back, and so yeah. You know, everyone has a list, and the CEDS project is a list, and I'm sure that there can be good pollination between different lists, and so setting that up I think is really really key. So that's really great observation.
Yeah, the earmarks are back. When there are two projects that I worked on with the Kennebec Valley Community College. One was the precision machining program. That was earmark funded based on industry demand. And also the radiologic technician program, which was funded twice by appropriations. And that was led in part by the district, you folks, led in part by the president of the community college, and also the hospitals screaming that they needed more radiologic technicians, imaging folks. So that's another area to consider that we had done successfully before, right in your coverage area. And the last thing I was going to mention is we spoke very briefly about exports, and I don't. I see you smiling, but I don't. This is not an SBA call, but one of the things that I would mention specifically relating to SBA is that we have export assistance loans, and they're loan guarantees. They're not grants, so they're somewhat different than this, but they are directly for companies, and they are very very flexible in terms of their use. It can be for companies that are currently exporting and need funding, or companies that simply want to begin exporting and need funding. So that's a subject, I just want to bookmark that as a subject for another day. But that's something that has historically been underutilized, but it's hard to get a 90% loan guarantee if you're not currently in the exporting business for an exporting company, but SBA does them, and we've got a good regional guy in Philadelphia who comes up either in person or sets meetings up virtually to work directly with small businesses. So again, you've done a great job. You've got a great sense of 20 years of history in a very short period of time. And have done a great job on this. But I just wanted to add those couple things in the hope that it would be helpful to you and to the other applicants.
No, definitely the export side is an area where we're weak in terms of figuring that out and kind of that ecosystem. And certainly there's some work that can be done there. And again, it is a priority of EDA. And again, we're probably more silent on that than we could be. And so it's good to know where partners are who can help guide everyone through the alphabet soup and connect the dots, et cetera. So no, all of this makes sense. One final slide, which I'll show you, is it's this kind of shows that we've actually achieved some things. We promised you 4 meetings. And we've delivered 4 meetings. We didn't have 16 meetings. So I think we haven't overwhelmed your schedules, and we really appreciate everyone's involvement in all of these in all of these meetings. So what we're going to do is, I hope this call has helped many of you kind of trigger more ideas about, you know, projects, about what to look for, what makes a good project from EDA's perspective. And how to kind of write that. And again, so we're keeping the project portal open, you know, till to Halloween. So I think that, so send us your scary projects. It's all good. And again, try to sort of use the language, you know, and again, thinking about 2 or 3 sentences, you know, on those CEDS priorities and EDA priorities. Thinking about the political will behind your project, how much buy-in do you have from kind of local elected officials or things of that nature, and we'll kind of continue to kind of categorize these things. Literally tomorrow, we're going to start the drafting process for the plan, and certainly we'll have some series of engagement with all of you as far as sending around a draft for review, and certainly our board will also be involved in reviewing a draft as well. Our drop dead kind of deadline is March for EDA. We're going to hopefully get it to them before March to submit for that. So we're entering kind of more the writing phase, so we won't have any explicit more meetings, at least at this juncture, unless there's kind of a new funding source that comes up, or maybe the CEDS committee just wants to meet and talk about some of these collaborative projects, which I'm all for. I think, you know, conversation and meetings are an underrated tool, and I think that we can use more coordination. So I'm open to that if there is a group that wants to talk or things like that nature. So I'll open it up for any more questions about the presentation, about the projects, about the timeline. Tim, your first hand up.
Thanks, and thank you to your team at KVCOG. I think you've done a good job pulling this together, and you're certainly well ahead of schedule, and that's commendable. I think in my experience, I've sat in on CEDS meetings for 6 or 7 years. I don't think you fully understand it until you actually go through an EDA process as a municipality or a nonprofit. Early on, you had talked about adding housing, and I thought you said you wanted to add housing as a standalone driver in addition to the 6 drivers.
Yeah, I think we would add housing as a driver for in terms of economic development, just due to the scarcity of housing, and realizing that EDA doesn't fund housing, you know, but again, I think it's something that we can't really avoid in terms of at least talking that it's part of the special sauce in terms of that. What's your thinking, Tim?
My thought would just be prioritizing housing under infrastructure and not start adding to your drivers.
Okay.
I think your drivers are tried and tested and true, and I know it probably doesn't make a hill of beans difference to EDA, but I don't want the CEDS process to get unwound to the point where every couple of years we're going to add another driver because this is our priority at the moment. Housing will always be a priority, and I think it will always be a key part of infrastructure. And if they don't fund it, then I don't see the rationale for making it a standalone driver. I'd rather have less drivers than more drivers, less pillars than more.
No, that's a good point. And again, you know, there can be having too many priorities and getting people lost, you know, in it. And I think that's a good observation as far as where to nest something and how to emphasize it. Even emphasizing it with case studies as a way of saying this is really important, but yet also kind of acknowledging that. Other thoughts, other questions that folks have?
Hi, this is Jean Dempster, and I just have a question. You know, so many projects are infrastructure, and I've been in a number of meetings where we're talking about the workforce, and bringing in underrepresented groups into the workforce and how that affects the employers too. So that people who have been involved with the justice system or they're in recovery from something, and we're looking to have more flexibility in what we might be asking from people so they're a good fit for those jobs. And so does a workforce development work in this? Okay.
Yes, yes. We just didn't receive, and again, I probably categorized, like Nancy's is a little bit more about workforce, but I put it under, under entrepreneurship, because hers was, again, we just didn't, that was the only one which seemed kind of there, and it has creating categories, and I like to have categories with more than one project in it. But if we got more workforce sort of style efforts, we'd have a kind of, we can add a category. So hence, if you have something, and again, descriptions are good. And I do think that that's certainly one way which we can address or talk about, things like housing too, in addition to Tim's thought about addressing it under infrastructure, that it's a factor in these things. So, a workforce category, I think would be advantageous. Does that help?
Great, thank you. Yep.
Jennifer Kierstead has her hand raised.
Yes, I am curious to know, and I asked Will this quickly, what the best source of data on the economic damage caused by the pandemic is in Central Maine, and to what extent has KV-COG tracked this for our region, or Mid-Maine Chamber of Commerce, or the state? And so that's one question. I have another one.
So you're looking for things like, unemployment figures in terms of the kind of the things like that, or public health, or economic, how many businesses closed, no particular thing. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes.
Good question. And I don't particularly have. We did have the state economist here, who again, when we talked about the demographics, there was some meaningful information, towards the beginning of the pandemic, but data cycles kind of lag, present day. Does that make sense? So there is some data, but it's not necessarily fresh. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. Will has his hand raised and probably has some additional guidance.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to revisit that meeting that we had with Amanda Rector, she did a really good job looking at statewide data and region-specific data that talks about COVID impacts. I put the link to that part of our website into the chat if anybody wants to take a look. But there are some other resources that I'll put in the chat as they come to mind. I think the primary ones will be looking at statewide impacts rather than super local impacts. A lot of the reporting stuff that we're getting from data, for example, like tax revenues and things like that, like we're getting up to, I think, June of this year. And so there is something of a lag in the reporting delays and things, like we heard some of the delays from census data and things like that. I think that's likely to continue. But yeah, if you take a look at that presentation, it gives a pretty good optic on what we experienced.
Another one
Great.
which we've all heard anecdotal information on is the real estate market. And when I ride the ski lift chair up at Sugarloaf, and I've got a carpenter from Dexter who's telling me that Dexter is booming and can't find vacant houses, I'm just startled and amazed. And so we all have examples of that. But the data behind that, good luck in trying to find some systemic compelling case, outside of, the real estate market is kind of upticked, et cetera. It's really hasn't been there's not a lot of, we're not at that data analysis yet where we can say in the town of Damariscotta, there were 1,000 summer residents that were suddenly converted to year-round residents. You can't really find that information systemically, kind of at a state or regional scale. I keep on asking for it and hoping someone out there, some ambitious graduate student, is going to collect all this information around the real estate boom, and to see whether it's real, is it imaginary, is it part anecdotal and part real. So that's an example of a change that we all think is happening, but you can't kind of like point to a data source yet that is compelling, in my mind anyway. Other questions?
One more.
Sure, go right ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, so how do we reference the revised CEDS document in our applications? And we've submitted projects to be included,
Yep.
but they haven't been included in the technically existing plan.
So, this is the way I would quarterback it. You can say it's in the spirit of the current plan. And it is a project within the revised plan. So keep it simple. And like that is, I think, the best thing. And both statements, would be kind of largely true in terms of kind of if you're able to kind of crosswalk things to those larger drivers. And a good grant writer is almost always able to sort of wordsmith a good compelling case in terms of that. That makes sense, Jennifer?
It does. Thank you.
Other questions? Kim, you're looking awfully silent. All right. Other ones? Jim, how about you? How are you doing? Okay.
I said, no, I'm good. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was muted.
Yes, very good. All right. Well, again, we can wrap up, now at 10. And we're finishing on time, which is great. Again, I really appreciate everyone's time over the course of the past couple months in terms of participating in these CEDS meetings. Thank you all for submitting projects and your questions. Again, the portal will remain open till Halloween. So feel free to send questions to myself or to Will or Robin that you might have on what we've talked about. We'll be reaching back out, probably, in late November with maybe a draft for people to take a look at. So let's keep up the good work and create some great applications for funding, because it is out there. This is a really golden time to really make some key headway for our communities in our region. So thank you all for your time today, and go forth and enjoy some sunshine, and we'll be in touch. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.